Good morning. So why am I here? I'm here because Graham made a mistake. And that brings him into the human family. Like the rest of us, he made a mistake. He miscounted Sundays. I was sitting with him when he discovered that he'd left a week out. He finished Colossians last week and he didn't want to start Advent this week. It's not ready yet. And so we had this spare week. And he said, "Would you like it?" And so I said, "Yes, I will, thanks." Because I'm able to do a hobby horse. You see, this week there was no reading set. So I was able to set the reading. Thank you, Joy. Beautifully done. A little clap doesn't go astray at all. Sometimes it's just a wonderful thing. Little tingles up and down the spine while she read this morning. So I had hobby horses. Which one of those hobby horses do I select? You know, where do I go? And so I decided to start from the beginning and start with the story of Genesis. I was inspired with the choice because of COP26, and I kind of was trying to put myself and humanity within the story of creation and within the questions of how we deal with such things as climate change. I don't expect to give you a policy speech on climate change, and nor am I going to assess government policy on climate change either, but I do want to reflect upon where God places us within the story of creation and where our responsibilities might be in that story. It's a question of truth, this whole business of climate change and the question of how we deal with truth-telling. We haven't got a very good record on when the truth comes, we don't handle it very well. And particularly religious people. When the scientists said the world is round, what did we say? We said the world is flat, and we told the guys who said the world is round that they should stop saying that. It was heresy. And when they said maybe people evolve, we said, "Oh no, not that. You better stop saying that because, you know, God made humanity instantaneously at the beginning of the world." You know, there's a number of other stories like that when those sorts of things occur. Once when I was writing something, and it was actually on the issue of same-sex marriage, a person who I'd written to wrote back and said, "I think you're putting scientific truth ahead of faith. Your faith needs to inform your science." And I said, well, truth is truth, isn't it? And when we discover truth, we discover God, if God is truth. And so the truth is what's important. It's dealing with the truth, and that's about as heavily I'll get into the subject of policy. The creation story you heard this morning so beautifully read, and I'm glad you read it so beautifully because it comes out in the poetic way that it really is. It's a poem or a liturgy. It's a poem or a liturgy written, well, that first story is. I noticed that I made the reading just a little longer than I thought it was by introducing Adam and Eve, but that's fine. We begin the story with the first day, when God creates light and darkness. And this story, in a sense, is a beautiful story. And then the second day we get the sky and the waters, the firmament. Above the sky, well, they saw a dome above the earth, and above the dome there was waters, and they knew there were waters up there because they leaked through from time to time. And they could see the waters down here because they were. So God creates the sky and the waters, both above the sky and below the sky. On day 3 we had the land and the vegetation. appear. And then there's a dividing line, because on day 4 we get the parallel, and this is where it becomes completely unscientific. This is where the scientist gets into trouble, and I too, because when you've got light and darkness, we know you've already got a sun, moon and stars. So when the sun, moon and stars are created on the 4th day, we already become aware, at least in the modern time, this is not a scientific story. It's doing something else. I'm intrigued by the fact that day 1 and day 4 parallel in that way, because day 5 and day 2 do as well, because we then get the birds and the sea creatures. We populate the sky and the waters. And day 6 and day 3 match the same way. We populate the land and the vegetation. And so we have this beautiful little pattern of parallelism between the first 3 days and the second 3 days. In this way we know that it's a structured poetic thing. And there are reasons for that too. Maybe it's because of their numerology. This is something that you can argue with me about later if you want to, because we get a bit funny about the Bible doing numerology. But when you look at all the 40s and the 12s and the 10s and the 3s and the 7s and the 144s and all of those numbers that are so, did I say 12s? Anyway, all of those numbers that are so significant in the Bible, you know that numbers matter. 3 is a really good number. 7, and that's the day God rested, 7 is a great number in the Bible and in kind of in our thinking. 6 is not such a good number. You remember the 666 of Revelation? You know, it becomes a picture of evil. So if you think about the numbers thing, you could probably say that God couldn't create the world in 6 days because it wouldn't be good. But God can create the days in 2 groups of 3 days because that would be really good. And on the 7th day, the perfect day, the complete day, the wonderful day, God rests and hands that day over to us as the first statement of industrial relations. Have a rest. Have a rest. And after all that, it's, after 6 days, it's time for rest. What the poem, what the liturgy is trying to say to us is already said in the first line. What it's saying is, in the beginning, God. In the beginning of creation, God. But in the beginning of the Bible, God. I believe from what I've read that there was a group of people around the end of the Babylonian captivity who sat down to collect together the story of Israel, to put together what we call the Old Testament. And they collected the stories from the northern kingdom and from the southern kingdom. And there were some that were written and there were some that weren't written, and they wrote them. And they created a beautiful big scroll, group of scrolls of the story of Israel and its faith. And when they'd written it all down, when they had prepared it all, the last thing they put together were the 2 creation stories. Because they were intended to introduce the themes of the whole Bible. So when I want to go back to the beginning of understanding God, I begin with Genesis 1. Because it teaches me that from the beginning, God is the beginning and the source of all things. However it happened. There I find in the first story and the second story of creation the themes of the Bible. about good and evil, right and righteousness, about grace and love and truth, and hope, and even despair. All the themes are there. These two stories are told to outline the Bible narrative, to give us a starting point. And God said it was very, very, very good. And I think that's really a significant point. This, what God does, wherever God does it, is very, very good. That's a definition of God. It's good. And he created humanity in his image. We're not too sure what the image means, except that maybe that it's somehow or other related, because of its context, to dominion. Somehow or other, whatever the image of God means in us, it's got something to do with our responsibility to take care or to oversee the world. In the second story of creation, the idea that was tempted to them in the second story, that if they ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would be like gods. Separate story. So to become like gods has something to do with having the ability to choose between good and evil, to be able to choose between this and that, to be able to make judgments and assessments and come to conclusions about that which is our responsibility of dominion. And what does that mean? Well, there's that bit of the Bible again, and I want to read it to you again. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. It's related. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. Let's see how equal that is. The second story brings in some problems, but you look, it's everybody. It's not just men. It's not male dominated at the beginning. It's male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, would you believe, exactly the same as he said before? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. This must be important. It's repeated twice. Must be important. This idea of dominion must be important. How does it work? This is God giving to us, who are created in God's image. We are sacred. Giving us responsibility to care for that which He's made. It's sacred. And God Himself is sacred. So it is the sacred caring for the sacred on behalf of the sacred. I made that up. I thought it was clever. I thought it was clever. So, are we doing the right thing? Like Graham, all of us make mistakes. I thought I'd tie that back in, you see. That's where the link is. You see, got to have a link. Huh?
You said it twice, it must be important.
It must be important. Good point. Good point. We make mistakes. With all sorts of good reasoning, we make mistakes. We dug up coal. At the time, we were doing it because we were in this great boom time and we needed the power to drive our new engines and our new heating and cooling and all the things that were cooling. I'm not sure about cooling. But it was the engine of the Industrial Revolution. We made this mistake with good motives. Now we've discovered it's a mistake. The question is, what do we do about it? We came to Australia and farmers cleared the land to build their monstrous farms, took out all the trees, and then wondered why the soil blew away. I remember when I was a teacher in the northeast of Victoria, a little place called Elham, which is Mallee spelt backwards with an E left off. I was a teacher in a one-teacher school, and from time to time, when the winds blew, the sky turned incredibly red or brown because the wind was blowing all of the desert sand across our sky. Even in Adelaide, from time to time, it all lifts. Now, that's because we took all the vegetation away. It's a mistake. And in recent years, the most productive activity in Australia for curing the global warming problem has been revegetating. We've revegetated, and that's a good thing. We're taking account. So we've done some things that are wrong, but they were well intentioned. The question for us is, what are we going to do about that? The story we've been reading and the message that we have and the truth that we believe is that in the beginning, God, at the beginning of all of this, so it's however we respond, we're going to respond from our ideals, from what is important to us, and what is important to us is our understanding of God. I have a saying. I don't necessarily believe what I say I believe. That's human. We're good at spin. I don't necessarily believe what I say I believe, but I certainly believe what I do I believe. When we act out of what's important to us. And if God is important to us, then we will act out of our understanding of what's important to God. If God has put us in charge of the world to care for it like He cares for it, then we need to respond in that way, with love for the world, because that's a reflective of the God we believe in. That's expressive of how we understand God. So what kind of God do you believe in? Do you believe in the God who rips the guts out of things for wealth and power and privilege? Or do you believe in the God who cares and loves and values all things? Jesus comes to us with a picture of God. And I always bring my banner, because my banner tells you what I believe. I believe that God is love, and that love means to value me, to value you, to value the earth, to value the trees, to value whomever, the enemy, the stranger, So when it comes to our reflecting on change, when it comes to reflecting on global warming, that it's about doing the valuing thing, that which gives value to the earth, to maintain what God declared the earth was, that it was good, intended to be good, valuable, holy, sacred. Includes everything. In the beginning, God. In the beginning of life, God. In the beginning of education, God. In the beginning of relationships, God. In the beginning of marriage, God. In the beginning of church, God in the beginning of worship. God in the beginning of everything. And I think that's what the story is telling us. That in the beginning, John picks up the theme and applies it to Jesus. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning. Now you know, if you've heard me before, that this is my primary question. It applies to our relationships with God, with each other. I think this is the summary of the love commandment. The question is, how am I going to love this one? And this one, on this occasion, might happen to be the creation, might happen to be earth itself. How am I going to value this one by my behaviour? How am I going to use the values and beliefs and ideals I've learnt from my faith to the earth on which I live? How am I going to love this one? The question, as I've said before, doesn't leave any doubt. It's not a question of will I love this one. The question is, how will I love this one? How will I value this one? How will I contribute to the value of this one? To the best of my ability. Understanding that, like Graham and like myself and like everybody else, I make mistakes and I do inadequate things. But when I confront them, I need to do something. I need to change my mind. We call it repentance. I need to change my mind. And the earth, I'm glad to say, the people of the earth are changing their mind and beginning to resolve the question. I hope and I pray that they will continue that through to its conclusion, because we need it to be so. Just a little quote from Romans 8, which highlights the fact that this story has been going on for a very long time. For the whole creation, says Paul in Romans, for the whole creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. That was on the basis of the fact that up until that time, it says the creation has been groaning in travail. Well, we know about creation groaning in travail. And why is it waiting for the children of God? Because the children of God will love. The children of God will repent. The children of God will act, because in the beginning, God.